In our gospel text today, as we just heard so beautifully read, we're plopped right into the middle of a scene where Jesus is teaching. He's just a little ways into what we know as the Sermon on the Mount. But to the disciples gathered around him, it's all new. They'd never heard anything like it. And at this point in Jesus' itinerancy, he's gotten a bit of a reputation. People from all over have heard about this healer and teacher, and they've pursued him. These crowds have come seeking his healing, desperate enough to ask for help from a man performing unsanctioned miracles outside of the temple, along roadsides, and in ordinary places. And these crowds are the people who've got nowhere else to turn. Everything and everyone else has failed them. But this teacher, this rabbi in dusty clothes with no fancy entourage, sees them. And what's more, he counts their needs as holy. These people have diseases of deficiency and contagion, leprosy and malnutrition, things that are manufactured by the forces of empire, the ruling power that creates abundance for the elite and scarcity for the people. But this rabbi, this Jesus guy, doesn't look away. And at some point, Jesus needs a minute. He's been followed for miles, so he decides to head up a hill and sit down for a bit. His disciples follow him, gathering around. I imagine he takes a deep breath. I imagine he knows that what he's about to say is going to take a while to sink in. And then he begins to teach. And what is this new and wild teaching that the disciples hear? Jesus says, "Blessed are the poor, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are those who are weak and meek and thirsty. Blessed are those actively making peace and those who are persecuted for their desire for justice." These are not the things that grant power or wealth or safety in this society. These are the things that are at best are ignored and at worst could get you killed. The disciples and the crowd, they would have known this. It's almost an incomprehensible subversion of the way of things, almost incomprehensible, except that Jesus is also living this different way out. He's already paying attention to those who are being overlooked. He's offering the chance for people to see that another way is possible. He's offering them a method for recognizing God's way of love and justice. And he's doing it even though things are really not looking good. Jesus has just heard that John the Baptist has been arrested, picked up, and disappeared by the very power that Jesus is preaching against. So we've got this Rabbi Jesus up on a hill with his countercultural actions and his revolutionary message. But things get even more radical because of who he's giving his message to. Who is this you he's speaking of? You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. The text says he is speaking to the disciples. And we know that at least the brothers are there, Simon and Andrew, James and John, the fisher people, the day laborers who leave the security of their livelihoods behind to follow this traveling teacher. And from what we know later in this gospel text, there are more disciples. So we can imagine that maybe Matthew, the tax collector, is there. Matthew, you remember, a guy who maybe had no other choice but to work for the man. The guy who sought safety in a government that did not care about him. In fact, it used him. Judas Iscariot was there too, probably. We don't know much about him besides that he later betrays Jesus to the folks who will kill him. But in relationship with Judas, we see the radical nature of Jesus' teaching maybe the most. Judas is trying to be in two worlds at once. The one of love and transformation that he's learning about from Jesus, and the one of Rome, where power and position rule. It's an impossible spot to be in, and Jesus sees that too. And it seems unlikely that these crowds that have been following Jesus would just stop once he decides to go up a hill. So maybe the crowds aren't that far away. Maybe Jesus is speaking to all whose needs are not being met by the way things are. Maybe he's speaking to you and to me. Maybe he is inviting in all those who are curious about another way of living, another way of loving. By doing this, Jesus is subverting the forces that dehumanize and erase. He's blessing and empowering the very lives of those who have otherwise been seen as expendable. It is to this group of people that Jesus is speaking when he teaches the Beatitudes. And it is to this group of people that Jesus says, "You are the salt of the earth. But if salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored?" He's reminding the disciples that they are salt and urging them to continue to be salty. But what does that mean? When I think about salt, I think about my cooking and how I use salt to add flavor to the things I make. But I also think about the ways that salt can be used to preserve and transform. I must admit that when I was a kid, I thought my dad was a total weirdo for eating sauerkraut, and I'm sorry, Dad, because I think he's watching on the live stream. But turns out I love all things fermented, and I cannot get enough. Sauerkraut, kimchi, fermented pickled okra and mustard greens, you name it, I'll eat it. And while there are so many ways to preserve and ferment food, so many fermentation methods utilize the most elemental ingredient, salt. In this process of fermentation, salt creates a beneficial environment that transforms the vegetable using bacteria. It preserves its essence by turning it into something that can last longer in a new and different way. Napa cabbage into kimchi, cucumbers into pickles, cabbage into sauerkraut. I could go on and on. We can talk after the sermon. As I'm sure many of you know also, fermented foods provide our gut biome with the good stuff, bacteria that research shows has really significant benefits on our health. Produce, transformed by salt, nourishes our entire systems. Without salt, what happens? How many of us have opened the produce drawer in our fridge only to find some salad greens or something unnameable, which has sat too long, rotted through and through? Salt, by its very essence, transforms life into new life. And salt, the compound sodium chloride, is a stable element. It can't lose its flavor. So maybe we aren't supposed to take Jesus so literally. Maybe Jesus is concerned with the ways that those in power can be manipulative, creating these compelling fabrications to convince us that there are things we can buy or pay attention to or believe in that will enhance the flavor of our lives or that will preserve us in some way from the realities of being human. But these things are actually rot-inducing and death-dealing. Maybe Jesus is reminding us that though there are so many things we cling to for safety and security in an increasingly precarious world, they are not the real salt. The real salt is in fact you, and you, and you. We have the inherent capacity for transformation, for creating new and sustaining and nourishing life, even when the world around us actively denies this. Jesus saw it, and Jesus called the disciples, and Jesus calls us into that vision and understanding. From salt to light. You are the light of the world, Jesus says. You don't turn on a lamp and then cover it up. You ensure that once it's turned on, it's giving light to everyone. Like salt that is naturally occurring and elemental, Jesus is reminding us that light is elemental too, that in our very essence, created by God, we are light. And this call to put our light on full display is Jesus' reckoning with the very real truth that light, just like salt with those fake flavor enhancers, gets co-opted too. We are surely seeing that today. The ways this exact biblical passage, this idea of being the light of the world, of being a city built on a hill, has shaped the insidious mythology of American exceptionalism that we see in our current political crisis. It was the idea of the early colonists that they, ordained by God, were to live as the new Israelites in America. It is that idea that has fueled and continues to fuel anti-Blackness, the erasure of Native peoples, and the snatching and disappearing of immigrants and those considered a threat to power. It goes on and on. So this light thing is devious, because what's often lit up is manufactured. Those in power are adept at spotlighting their agenda. They force our attention to that which reinforces their claims and maintains their power. But if we go back to the Beatitudes, where does Jesus shine his light? On something radically different. He focuses it on those living in precarious and unsafe conditions, those in need of healing, those in need of protection or in need of community, those who are desperate for another way. Jesus turns his attention here to broaden what is visible, bringing the generative power of light to places that have been relegated to darkness by those who actively deny their flourishing. Jesus shines his liberating light here because he knows this is where life is. This is where God is. Last week, I was talking with a newish community volunteer at Miracle Mondays as we were setting up for the free clothing store. She isn't a churchgoer, but she's been wanting to get more involved and found St. Paul and St. Andrew. She was clearly distraught and despairing of all that is going on in our country. And she asked me, "What are you telling people in times like these? What are the pastors saying?" I said to her, "It is so overwhelming, isn't it? We keep on gathering together." She might have thought she was alone in her sincere worry and fear and despair, but she's not. I met her there. I feel it too. I have felt the weight of so much worry lately. Have you? My anxiety is heightened and my body is on edge. Like her, I don't always know what to do with this despair. But I do know that despair is a privilege. My own despair shows me the ways that I follow the false light, how I once thought that the way things are would keep me safe. But the light of Jesus reminds me to look at what has always been, and I see how the way things are have not kept so many safe for so long. And I do know that giving in to despair is believing the lies of the powerful, that I am powerless. But I am not. You are not. We are salt. We are light. This week, our Lenten theme invites us to practice connecting with the city. And in the last piece of our text from today, Jesus, far from Jerusalem, on a hill in the countryside, tells the disciples that they are like a city built on a hill that cannot be hidden. The people gathered together make up a city. We are the light which cannot be covered up, and at times like this, more than ever, we must live into this light. And I am struck by this as I look around at the ways this community is being a city of light. I see it in the way Niurka and Hector, the founders of Venezuelans and Immigrants Aid, keep showing up here early every Monday morning for Miracle Monday. They continue to care for and build community among immigrants and alongside so many of you, despite the powers of evil actively working against them. I see it in Pastor Ekama's commitment to supporting college students at a university which has chosen padded pockets and collusion with the state over the safety and well-being of the young adults they are supposed to protect. I see it in the ways so many of us are wrestling with our despair and our anger and our fear, bringing it here, sharing it in community, resisting the forces of isolation, and trusting that our capacity for resistance together is strong even in the midst of the unknown. I see it in witnessing a friend of mine accompany their friend to legally change their name, blatantly disregarding the state's attempt at erasure, and boldly claiming their beautiful transness, which is a dazzling light for the world. The people gathered together make a city that cannot be hidden, no matter the forces of evil that try. So, we're not by the Sea of Galilee. We're not sitting with Jesus among stinky fisher people and tax collectors. Well, but we might not be so different from those gathered. Maybe we are desperate for healing or searching for protection. Maybe we have bought into the lie that we are powerless. Maybe right now, more than ever, we must remember the compelling teachings of this traveling rabbi who says to all who have been tossed aside or taken for granted, you are the salt that preserves and transforms, capable of resisting the powers that rot and destroy. You can nourish whole communities. You are the light that illuminates the truth of God's kingdom, a created community, a city where the power of life is greater than the forces of death. Together, we are called to boldly live out this empire-toppling, life-changing, and world-transforming way. So, let's shine on, you salt of the earth people, and keep building the city of God together.